Hey guys, this is Donnie of Horror Story 96, and I'm here at Fort William Henry in Lake George, Warren County, New York. And for this video, we're gonna explore some paranormal activity in this in the ghost tours. So, yeah, let's see what this ghost tour has to offer.
William Henry are still here to this day. That technically makes this a military burial ground. So I would like to see everybody please extend the courtesy and the reverence that is required of a place like this. Okay? Second, this is not a haunted house. Things are not going to jump out at you. Nobody is going to grab you, and we are going to most importantly keep our hands to ourselves. Yes?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, yes?
Yes.
Okay, good. Because we don't know who in this group is going to punch first and ask questions later, and I'll tell you this, some of us have a really mean right cross. Okay, so we don't want to tempt fate on this one. Also, this fort is burnt down twice in its history. We are trying not to go for the trifecta. So if you have your Benjamin Franklin on you, please keep that in your bag. No cigarettes, okay? No combustibles. If you have cigars, I will confiscate them because my humidor is starting to get a bit thin. Okay, I'm trying to stock up. Now, photographs are not only encouraged, or are not only permitted, but they're encouraged. It's the only way with your evidence that I can go home at the end of the night and not think that I'm slowly losing my mind. Okay, so please take pictures at all points throughout the tour. If you do see something cool, first check and make sure it's not your own reflection, because that's a really awkward conversation for me to have with you. Second, we are starting a scrapbook. We have already started a scrapbook, and we would love to add whatever evidence that you capture to that collection. Okay? I'm glad everybody's wearing comfortable shoes, because we are going to be walking throughout this tour. Some of it is over gravel. I have yet to see somebody try to navigate the courtyard wearing 6-inch stilettos, but guarantee I will record every bit of that baby giraffe walk as it happens and post it immediately to Facebook. Okay? Now, that being said, I'm glad we're all on the same page here. We are going to be making corny jokes throughout the night. You can either laugh or leave. The choice is yours. Okay? Everybody ready to rock and roll? Yep. Everybody feel confident? Yep. Okay,
yes.
Please follow me out into the courtyard where you'll take a seat on our 100% historically accurate park benches.
Camera ready?
Yes. That was from 3 years ago under the stairwell.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Well, welcome back.
Yeah, thanks.
Did I miss the ghost?
Thank you. Hold that door, Gio. We're back outside.
Alright guys, comment down below if you see any ghosts. Because I'm going to keep my camera open to see if hopefully we'll come across any ghosts in the video. If you see them, let me know in the comments.
Oh, really?
Why are the lights blue?
Welcome again to Fort William Henry. My name is Rose. I'll be working with CJ tonight, taking you guys through the fort here. As he mentioned, what you're sitting in right now is a recreation that we built in the 1950s. We got the original blueprints from Great Britain when we decided to rebuild this place. But the fort that was originally here was built in 1755 by the British to be used during the French and Indian War. It was burnt down 2 years later after the French won it in a siege in August of 1757. This place was not Britain's main stronghold in this area during the French and Indian War. It was actually 16 miles south of here at Fort Edward. This place was kind of built to be Fort Edward's alarm system. They wanted advanced warning in case the French ever decided to sail down the lake from Fort Carillon, which we today call Fort Ticonderoga, and attack, which they did in August of 1757. How long do you guys think this place was supposed to last under siege? A week. 10 days.
A month.
A month. Any other guesses?
2 months.
A year. 2 months. 2 days is the correct answer, actually. This place was not the place to be. We had the worst cannons the Army had to offer. We were not well staffed. It smelled really badly. And it was not supposed to last more than 2 days under siege. That's the estimate given by William Eyre, the original architect. He said if you got really, really, really lucky, 2 days you might be able to last. And that's all it really had to stand for. They needed it to stand just long enough for a rider to get down to Fort Edward and then return with reinforcements, which is what the British expected to happen when the French rolled up August 3rd, 1757. Except that after the second day passed, they still didn't have reinforcements. And then third day passed, and the fourth day passed, and that evening, the Lieutenant Colonel George Monroe, who was in charge of this fort, got a letter from the commander at Fort Edward basically saying, good luck, you're on your own. And so they actually made this place last 6 days instead of just 2. And that surprised absolutely everyone. No one expected it to last more than 2 days. And they were holding out for those reinforcements, but even after they said they weren't coming, they kept fighting just as hard until the French managed to land a really lucky mortar shot on the northwest bastion and finally breached the walls. Now, Lieutenant Colonel George Monroe at the time was just Colonel Monroe, and he could not surrender until the walls had been breached. Normally, that was the start of the bloodiest portion of the fighting, when the one army tried to infiltrate the fort of the other army. But Lieutenant Monroe knew that there wasn't going to be any backup, and so he just flew the white flag so that they could stop the bloodshed early. That so impressed the Marquis de Montcalm, who was the commander of the French army, that he gave Monroe a very gentlemanly terms of his surrender, with the full honors of war. Basically, Montcalm said, we're not going to kill you guys. We're not even going to imprison you. You can actually just go. You can take all of your possessions, take your provisions, take your weapons, just leave the gunpowder and ammunition because I need that, and we'll give you an armed escort down to Fort Edward. Now, the British were so pleased with this deal that they did not wait for the armed escort. They grabbed their things and they ran for it. They also didn't wait for any of the wounded soldiers. Sorry, those boats have been interrupting every single tour all night, and I'm really tired of them. They're the real reason we still have cannons pointed at the lake, by the way. We're going to take them. So, they also did not take any of the wounded soldiers who were recovering in the casemates or basements of the West and East barracks. Emergency field hospitals cropped up in those 2 basements because the original hospital in the North Barracks was quickly deemed too unsafe to use during the week of the siege. They also left behind a lot of the camp followers who were in the basements tending to the soldiers. Now, camp followers were people who followed camps to different locations. At this instance, it was mostly the wives, mothers, sisters, and children of the American provincial soldiers who came to this area to help support the British with this battle. And so they left 2 very vulnerable groups of people behind. But the French said, don't worry about it, it's okay. You guys stay here until you're strong enough to leave. We'll leave a skeleton crew of about 10 men to guard you. And then when you're strong enough, we'll give you an armed escort down to Fort Edward. And they were okay with that, mostly because they had to. And the British were pretty happy, the French were pretty happy because they finally got the fort they wanted. The British were relatively happy because they escaped with most of their lives. But I left off one very important group of people. That is the French allied Native Americans. Britain had the larger army in this fight. And so the French teamed up with the natives to kind of bolster their army, to have a better chance at winning the war with the British. They invited natives from as far away as the Dakotas and Arizona to participate in this battle, which we did have them come from as far away as the Dakotas and Arizona to battle in this battle. Now, the French had promised them payment if they came to help them take over this fort in just 2 measly days. They had been promised payment in the forms of the possessions of the soldiers, the provisions of the fort, the weapons from the fort, and the people here. They could capture the people and sell them off as slaves, integrate them into their own tribes, whatever they wanted. They also wanted proofs of kill. The French put bounties on the heads of the British soldiers because, again, they had the larger army. They wanted the natives to go out in guerrilla warfare style, take out as many British soldiers as possible before they ever met in a formal battle, so that the odds would be a little bit better. They would take proofs of kill, scalps, noses, fingers, toes, 2 French outpost cities and towns and exchanged them for possessions, weapons, pretty much anything they wanted. And so when the natives finally came into this fort after a battle that lasted 4 days longer than it should have, to see that their paycheck had essentially gotten up and skipped out of the main entrance doors while their supposed allies waved them goodbye, do you think they were happy? No, they were pretty furious. And it sparked the massacre of Fort William Henry. If you've seen or read The Last of the Mohicans, that's a dramatic retelling of the story of this fort. So after a while, everyone inside the fort had been killed, and the natives had caught up to the army marching down to Fort Edward and killed the stragglers as well. And so then the French had to decide what to do with this place, and they realized they didn't want to bother holding it for the winter after all. It had a huge hole in the northwest bastion. It was full of dead bodies, and it smelled horrific. The British were not well known for their hygiene at this time. They had a lot of issues with their well, which we'll get to in a little bit. And the Marquis de Montcalm complained that he could smell this fort 3 miles before he saw it. So he simply ordered his men to burn it down. And after it burnt, they put the bodies of everyone who died in the siege and the massacre in the parade grounds here and used the sand that would have filled the walls to cover the graves and leveled out the area. And that's what it looked like for a good long while, until the 1950s when a group of investors came to this area, took the original blueprints of this fort from Great Britain, and decided they wanted to try to compete with Disney World. It's going great. This is pretty accurate to how that original fort would have looked, with 3 main differences. We would have had an east barracks against the east wall to match the west barracks, a south barracks behind you to match the north behind me, and we are about 4 feet up and give or take 10 feet to the left of the original placement of the fort. But otherwise, this is what it looked like, and this is pretty much exactly where it stood. Now, we're still 4 feet up because, as CJ said, a lot of the bodies buried in that grave are still buried below our feet. You are in a cemetery right now. We did very little excavating beyond what was necessary to rebuild in the 50s. We've only done 1 archaeological dig inside the walls of the fort in the 70s, in that open area there. But otherwise, the ground has gone undisturbed, and so have the graves. When we chose that spot to do our dig in, we picked it because it would have been near the entrance to the casemate or basement of the East Barracks, which, again, emergency field hospital. We figured a hospital would be a good place to go looking for something. And we were right, because we did find something. We found 5 somethings, actually. We found 5 bodies with 4 heads and 11 legs. And you can stop trying to make the math work, because it doesn't. That extra leg, honestly, really isn't very interesting. Amputation was the main form of surgery during this time period, so finding an extra leg on a pile of dead bodies in the hospital, it makes a lot of sense. But the missing head is a little more interesting because we think we figured out what happened to it. There was a French Jesuit priest named Pierre Robard who had come into the fort after the massacre because he wanted to bless the dead here. And in his journal, he wrote that when he entered the fort, he was passed by a native Huron warrior leaving the casemate of the East Barracks. This warrior was drenched in blood and proudly displaying a severed human head. Pierre Robard saw him walk out the door and never saw him again, so we think that that's where the head wandered off to. If you had come before 2 Aprils past, you would have seen our military crypt in that area over there. It was a half building that had a short flight of stairs leading down to the site the archaeologists dug in. We had a life-size photograph of the bodies they found. If you had come before the 1990s, you would have seen those actual bodies on display in the crypt. But in the early 1990s, New York State came in and said, guys, we think it's kind of messed up that you're charging such a large admission fee to go and look at dead bodies. That's kind of ridiculous, don't you think? And the museum said no. And then in 1993, New York State passed a law saying that human remains were no longer classified as artifacts. They are actual remains of human people, and you can't have them out in museums for people to go look at. And so we had to bury the bodies. Before we got a chance to, though, several universities, the University of Arizona being one of them, asked to study the bones to see what they could find. And the fort agreed as long as we got a copy of the report when they sent the bodies back to us, which we did. We buried the bodies in the military cemetery by the military parking lot over there. And we looked at the report and saw that the man who had lost his head had had it cut off with 4 to 5 blows from an intentionally blunted tomahawk. Now, tomahawks usually were sharpened to such a degree that they could slice through a human vertebra in one hit. So the fact that it took 4 to 5 blows meant that it was probably intentional, which it was. The natives also recognized that Britain had the larger army in this fight, and so they intentionally blunted the tomahawks that they used to decapitate soldiers, because they engaged in a lot of psychological warfare and scare tactics to try to scare the British out of wanting to fight them in the first place. They blunted the tomahawks they used to decapitate soldiers so that that death took that much longer, so that anyone who saw it would remember it in the future and hopefully turn tail and run the next time they had to fight the natives. They also occasionally would take groups of prisoners out into the woods, and they'd tie up all but one of the men they captured, and they'd take the last over to a tree, and they'd cut him right here. If you cut a human being right here, you can reach in and pull out their intestines, and it will not kill them immediately. They would nail the man's intestines to a tree and beat him with clubs and sticks until he ran around the tree, disemboweling himself. And then they'd go right down the line of soldiers, leaving the bodies tied to the trees with their own entrails so that any patrols that wandered by would find them and hopefully turn around and run and do the same when they had to fight the natives later. We also have another story of the native brutality from the Journal of Israel Putnam. Has anyone recognized that name? It's okay. People don't usually recognize his name. He was stationed at Fort Edward during the French and Indian War as a British soldier. He is better known, rather his catchphrase is best known. He was a commander at the Battle of Bunker Hill during the Revolutionary War. He is the one credited with saying, "Don't fire until you see the whites of their eyes." Okay, I'm seeing nods now. Good. We found out pretty recently that he's also directly related to the Putnams of the Salem witch trials. He's actually the son of Joseph Putnam, who is trying to stop the trials, and the nephew of Thomas Putnam, who is driving the trials in the first place and getting things instigated. Holidays must have been real fun with that family. But while he was staying at Fort Edward, he kept a journal. And he said in his journal that one night he heard screaming in the woods. And because he's far braver than I am, he grabbed a group of men and went to investigate. Eventually, the screaming stopped. They came across a man leaning against a tree. Except as they approached, they realized it was actually a soldier who had been tied to the tree with his own intestines. His face had been cut here and peeled back behind his head. His jaw had been ripped out of his skull and thrown into the grass at his feet. And something that's usually attached to the lower half of a man was shoved down his throat. That guy probably died of suffocation. The natives were very, very good at what they did. Their brutality actually leads into our first ghost story. Who's ready for a spooky story? Yeah?
I am.
Okay, I would say about half of you replied. Everyone else, the door is back there. Good night. When we had our crypt over here, occasionally when you were wandering around the parade grounds, you would hear a man calling for help. And if you went to look, you wouldn't find anybody. Sometimes when you looked down the stairs or took a photograph looking down the stairs, you would see a red mist standing somewhere in the room that was vaguely human-shaped. We kind of put these two occurrences together and assumed it was a British soldier. We had it more or less confirmed on one evening for us on one of our tours. A family brought their very young daughter to this last tour, which we don't recommend because kids get really tired around this time of night. And she was young enough that she was pretty cranky that she was still awake. And so she was wandering around the parade grounds because she did not want to listen to us talk. As she was wandering around, she had to quickly catch up with the group that was walking to the well, which is our next stop. Her parents were keeping an eye on her, so we weren't too worried about the raccoons kidnapping her. But when she passed the crypt, she suddenly stopped. She turned back and went to look down the entrance and started screaming and crying. And then she ran for her parents. Her parents picked her up, but she was so terrified she couldn't explain what had scared her so badly. She was absolutely inconsolable. So her parents took her into the lobby to try to get her to calm down, and eventually she was able to tell them that she heard a man calling for help from inside the crypt. So she went to look. When she got to the top of the stairs, she looked down, and staring back up at her, she saw a red man with a face of ground beef. She then proceeded to detail down to the buttons on his coat the uniform of a British regular soldier, except she insisted he had a face of ground beef. There were no facial features. That was actually not the first time we had heard that story, but that was definitely the most traumatizing one. So we finally decided to do some research. We found that one of the tribes allied with the French believed that how you looked in the moment of death is how you would look for the rest of eternity. So if they really hated a person, like they really hated the British, they would skin the man's face before they killed him, hoping that if they took his face before he drew his last breath, he wouldn't have a face in the afterlife. No one would recognize him, and he'd spend eternity alone. They would then take those faces and cure them and wear them as masks into battle to further scare the British. Because if you are Tommy from New York, and a couple weeks ago, your good friend Johnny from Massachusetts died fighting the natives, and now you're fighting the natives, and you look up to see your good friend Johnny from Massachusetts sprinting at you with a tomahawk trying to kill you, at the very least, you're not going to be aiming very well. Their hope is that you just turn tail and take off. We think that that's what happened to this poor soldier over here. As brutal as all these stories are, we do have to remember these people were trying to protect their families and their homes from an invading force that had much larger numbers and much better technology than they did. So they were just doing what they thought was necessary to protect their homes. That kind of explains why they did what they did a little bit. We haven't seen this spirit as much since they filled in the crypt 2 Aprils ago, but we do occasionally have guests get photobombed, I guess, by a red mist over in that area, particularly on the stairs these days. So take pictures in that direction and let us know if you get anything weird. The main claim of paranormal activity these days we get in the parade grounds themselves is of disembodied footsteps, usually moving from the main entrance over to the well. And that's where we're going to go next. So you guys can stand up, follow CJ that way.
Field, maybe chasing a butterfly or a bird or an animal, and unfortunately encountered the well before she saw the well, leading to her demise as her remains were never actually found. Lake George right over there. Well, the reason for that is because has anybody here ever tried to recover water while being shot at? Yeah, it's not a great time. Okay, and Lake George also freezes over in the winter, approximately 3 feet worth of ice, to the point where people actively try to drive Jeeps and ATVs out on the ice during the winter. Okay, so if during the winter you tried to go out there and get water, you brought out a handheld auger and you drilled a hole in the ice, dipped a bucket down, got your water, made it back here to the fort, went back for round 2. By the time you got back there, the ice would have frozen over again. So in 1756, Roger and his rangers, Robert Rogers, dug a well here for the fort. Now, the idea was they were going to be tapping into the same crystal clear lake water that you have out in Lake George, which at this point in history, the church had even deemed was clean enough that you could baptize people in it. Kind of a big deal. This is the same church that is burning people alive at the stake for practicing science, okay? So, just to give you some perspective on the situation. Now, the problem is, they didn't dig down into crystal clear Lake George water, they dug down into swamp water. Anybody here knows what happens when you drink swamp water? Yeah, you get sick. Anybody ever play Oregon Trail?
Yep.
Yeah, I don't know who Terry is, but apparently dissing him's a bad idea because my whole family died of dysentery multiple times, okay? And dysentery is actually the cause of more casualties here at Fort William Henry than actual casualties that were inflicted during the siege. We have historical records to prove that. Now, one of the solutions that they tried to enact is mixing rum with the water. Remember, we don't have access to germ theory at this point in history, so we're going to kind of try to experiment until we figure it out. That wasn't enough, so they tried going straight to rum rations. Now, you have a bunch of 16 to 21-year-old enlistees armed with muskets, black powder, and cannons, and you're going to give them just rum to drink. I don't know if you could put 2 and 2 together on this one, but that's a bad idea. It basically turns into the modern day Marine Corps, and I can tell you from experience, it's a bad time. All right, so they go back to drinking the nasty, stinky, poopy water, and hilarity ensues. Now, dysentery, for those of us who don't know, is rapid dehydration through fecal expulsion. You are pooping yourself to death. It's not a good way to go. And it's not a slow pooping, it's a fast pooping, and there are no bathrooms around here, if you haven't noticed, other than our 21st century plumbing that we have. So where you're going to be directed to relieve yourself is over the battlements, which is then going to seep into the groundwater. Oh yeah, but it gets worse.
my
So you're up here during the winter, and your friend Bob decides he wants to try his hand at wrestling a muskrat. And that muskrat has rabies and kills him. So now Bob is dead. Dead and freezing. Now, are you going to keep Bob's dead body here in the middle of the courtyard for all to see and for morale to be improved by his cadaver just laying there? No, you're going to yeet him over the wall, because you're not going to go out there because you might get killed by something, possibly another badger, possibly a native, possibly a Frenchman with a really, really good shot. But then the spring is going to come, which is also known as the fighting season, which is when weather's good enough for you to actively lay siege to a fort, and scouting parties are going to go out and start taking pot shots at your battlements from the wood line. So you're not going to go out and grab Bob. You're going to let Bob defrost. And as Bob defrosts, Bob is going to rot. And Bob is going to seep into the groundwater. It gets worse and worse as I go along, doesn't it? Now, the reason that I bring this up is because this well was the hub of social activity in the fort. It was the place where everybody in the fort, regardless of rank, age, or gender, would end up meeting at some point throughout the day to draw your ration of water. The ghost story that's related to this well has to do with a bunch of reenactors who stayed here back in 2016 during Siege Week. Now, we had a camp set up for them outside, where on the battlefield, where they would have been staying during the French and Indian War, but they decided they wanted to experience sleeping overnight in the fort. Not because they were looking for something paranormal, but because they wanted to see what it was like to stay in ye old 18th century accommodations. So we accommodate them and we lock them in for the evening. 10 o'clock at night, they start hearing footsteps out here in the courtyard marching back and forth, and they go, well, it must just be maintenance closing up. They did say they were going to lock us in here. We do have an event going on. There's probably stuff happening. Well, 11 o'clock at night hits, and there's still the crunching of feet out here in the courtyard. So they go, well, that's weird. So they take their 100% historically accurate camp chairs, and they set up out here at the well. And from 11:30 in the evening until 4 o'clock in the morning, they heard the marching feet of somebody or something incorporeal moving from the gate behind you, where the front entrance to the fort used to be, up here to the well, and then into the commandant's building, where General Monroe would have been, waiting to issue out the orders of the day. So it's our belief that they encountered a residual haunt of soldiers who had been stationed here at the fort, entering the fort from the tent city that would have existed outside to the south, coming in, grabbing their ration of water, and reporting to Colonel Monroe to get their marching orders for the day, reliving the mundane garrison life of being here at Fort William Henry. Now, every haunted location that I've ever researched that has a well inevitably has the spirit of the well, right? Well, we continue that long tradition here at Fort William Henry with a spirit of the well. So it was during a daytime tour, believe it or not, that a gentleman peered over the well and saw a little girl at the bottom of it looking up and waving at him. Oddly optimistic for somebody who's fallen down 60 feet worth of sheer well. However, he reported this and somebody else verified that they had seen the same thing. Now, I would like to bring to your attention the fact that Fort William Henry is neither funded by the state nor the feds. We are independently owned and operated. Therefore, all of that we do here, right, from the archiving to the historical research to the daily reenactments and the ghost tours, is funded by wonderful individuals such as yourself who share a passion for history, or the creepy who decide to show up and share that love with us, right? To close down in peak season shuts off a revenue stream that potentially keeps this place alive. and this place was then shut down for 48 hours. Well, the New York State Troopers were called up and sent in a spelunking team to send a cave diver down the well to determine whether or not there was actually somebody down there. They returned with a skeleton of a bird. Resources well spent. But you have to think, right, for not only the Fort William Henry Corporation, but also the state of New York to allocate the funds, resources, and personnel to investigate those claims, there must have been something to it. That's how I look at it. Now, we found a newspaper clipping from 1938 of a family that was visiting what used to be, or what is now Lake George. It was called Caldwell. They were up here visiting. They were relatively wealthy. This is where the train tracks ended up ending if you took the train from Manhattan north. And this was a popular place for people to visit. Now, their little girl went missing. It was chalked up to misadventure. The search efforts went for multiple months. At the end of the day, we think Yogi the Bear got her. However, you do need to remember that this, at that point in history, was just a field. It wasn't developed, and everything behind you was swampy marshland. It hadn't been filled in and developed yet. So it is not unreasonable around here in the fort.
Does anyone have any questions while we wait for the rest of the group?
Well, that's it for the ghost tour, guys. I'm sorry if we didn't find any ghosts or anything like that. Unfortunately, the paranormal investigator wasn't there, so yeah, so unfortunately I couldn't get any filming of audio from the voices for this recording, unfortunately. So that's gonna be it for the paranormal ghost tour for this video. But don't worry, I do have last year's recording, so I'm gonna include this in the video in this clip, as you'll see right about now.
You head out that door to the right and be back in the lobby. Thanks for coming, guys.
Thank you.
Charged this area is. We also want to bring your attention to the one spirit that we really believe inhabits this particular display, and we call him Doc. Now, the reason we call him Doc is not just because he inhabits the surgery display, but because this shadow figure that we see walk back and forth and who we think is responsible for fidgeting with all sorts of bottles and balls and tubes inside of this display, including the shirt behind old buddy's head right there, which sometimes ends up draped over another mannequin with no explanation for it, is approximately 6'2" when his shadow is observed. Now, the average height of an individual at this point in time is about 5'4". Now, if you were tall, you were considered healthy. If you were considered tall and healthy, you were also considered intelligent. So if you were around 6 feet tall, you could be a doctor. Now, I'm 6 feet tall. How many of you want me hacking away at your limbs? Yeah, exactly, okay? But because of this belief and this qualification in the British military, we believe that the spirit that walks back and forth here is that of a doctor who is charged with tending to the wounded here in the fort. Now, with that being said, I'm going to pass you back over to Rose for our last stop of the evening.
When you're done with your pictures, come join me and gather around the staircase here. We're going to be looking under it for a couple of minutes. Unfortunately, this is our last stop tonight, but we try to save the best for last. There is a spirit that hangs out underneath the stairs here. No, it's not Harry Potter. Yes, people have asked me that before. We don't know the spirit's name. He's never shared it with us. We don't want to give him a name he doesn't like because he tends to attack people who make him angry, especially if they do that on purpose. So we simply call him the spirit under the stairs, or him. Now this spirit, we believe, was one of the natives who participated in the massacre down here. Because this is likely where the massacre of Fort William Henry actually began. During the week of the siege, there was a hospital here and a recovery room. And so when the British Army cleared out and all those wounded soldiers, women and children were left behind, this is where you would find them. So when the natives came into the fort, they would have come in through the huge hole blown in the northwest bastion, right down the same stairs we came down, and started killing everyone in this area. At the time, that was the only way in or out of this room. So the people here had literally nowhere to go. We think that this spirit was one of the natives who participated in that massacre based on information given to us by multiple psychics over the course of multiple years. We usually wait for 3 or 4 different people over the course of several years to give us a similar or the same story before we start putting any credit to it. And the story that we've gotten is that when this spirit came down, he started killing the soldiers he came across. Eventually, though, he came across a young mother and her very young child. The way the mother was shielding her child and begging for their lives made him pause. He realized they were non-combatants. They had nothing to do with the fighting. And so it wasn't really fair to kill them. Then he turned to continue killing the soldiers around them. Because he spared them, but not the men who did the actual fighting. The mom didn't trust that he was actually going to let them live, and so she grabbed a knife off of a nearby table and stabbed him in the back and killed him. He's not super fond of women, especially young mothers with their really young children. The sweet spot seems to be 2 to 3-year-old boys. But he's even less fond of people who go under the stairs into his space and make him angry on purpose. He's the real reason we have the please don't pick a fight with the ghosts rule. We had one gentleman a couple of years ago, and I say gentleman very, very loosely. This guy was pretty belligerently drunk when he showed up at the fort. He's the reason you're not allowed to be drunk at the fort anymore. And he really expected something paranormal to happen. And as the tour was going on, he was getting more and more frustrated and louder because it was a quiet night. They didn't notice much happening. By the time the tour got down to this spot, the man decided he was going to make something happen. So he went under the stairs into his space and started shouting racial slurs and insults, which made the guides pause, because we hadn't seen that before. But the rest of the tour thought it was hilarious. And so they started egging the guy on, who then started to punch the air like he was in a fist fight with the ghost. And that snapped the guides out of their stupor, and they grabbed the man out from under the stairs and kicked everyone out, because everyone had been part of the problem. It wasn't fair for this spirit, and it wasn't safe for us who had to come back down here later. Because you guys get to leave, but we're here for a little while longer. We don't want to have angry ghosts while we're trying to close up for the night. They made sure that that guy was the last one out of the casemate, so he didn't start a fist fight and push someone alive down the stairs, because we have enough ghosts here. When he got to this step here, he lurched forward like someone had pushed him. And then he shouted, "Who pushed me?" The guides, waiting for him in the West Barracks, said, "Nobody pushed you. You are the last person out of the casemate. You are drunk and obnoxious, and by the way, you're banned from the fort. Get out and never come back." So he stood up and started walking out of the West Barracks, loudly complaining about the guides. And then his complaints started to change. And he instead started to complain that his back was burning. And burning and burning and burning. And he was complaining so loudly by the time they got back to the lobby that the guides decided to humor him. They lifted his shirt expecting to find nothing, but instead found 3 long red scratch marks from right shoulder to opposite left hip, as if somebody else was tired of his antics as well. Now again, normally the people who get attacked by this spirit instigate Again, we ask you not to do that because you get to leave, but we're here usually until 11 or so. We do have a shrine set up for the spirit underneath the stairs on the 4x4. Guides leave offerings, paranormal investigators leave things for him. We're just trying to make him a little more comfortable and a little less, hopefully, less apt to attack people. We're not sure why he hangs out down here, other than it sounds like a decent place to defend yourself from. This area is usually filled with British soldiers, and he likely killed a couple of them. So having a spot where you can get your back into a corner sounds like a decent place to hide. Sometimes people see a shadowy figure crouched in the corner here. Sometimes they see eyes staring back at you. He doesn't just stay down here. He does wander elsewhere in the fort. I've seen him up in the West Barracks personally. But he always comes back here, which is why we set up the shrine here. Now, unfortunately, this is the end of our tour. If you would like to take some pictures, you are more than welcome to.
What's that stuff over there?
So that's the shrine that we set up for him. Trinkets people leave for him. So if you would like to take pictures, go for it. And when you're done, I'm going to meet you right over here, and I'll lead you back to the lobby to enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you for coming.
I showed this to your other guy. This is from 3 years ago underneath there.
Oh, that's cool. Oh, that's nice.
That was from that side of it. Yeah, this is it.
Wall firing squad style.
Which wall?
So as we walked in, we passed by the original fireplace, which is an original part of the construction of the fort. We do have a spirit that's associated with the fireplace. We call her Mary. The reason we call her Mary is not necessarily because she's introduced herself to us and said, "Hi, my name's Mary, I'm a ghost." It's because Mary was a very common name at the time, and we get the feeling that this spirit in particular is female. And mostly we encounter her through smells. Folks, if we can move down just a little bit more so that everybody has room. So if you come down here and you smell something akin to molasses or cloves or cinnamon, or sometimes even baking bread, we believe that that's her interacting with us. We've also found that if you hang out in front of the fireplace for too long, sometimes you'll have a gentle push. If you take too long on the stairwell, she'll do the same thing, kind of a hurry up and get out of my way kind of vibe. The way my coworkers have described it, it's kind of like the grumpy lunch lady. You know, she has a job to do, and if you're in the way, you're part of the problem, and she'd rather have you be part of the solution. So that leads us to our 18th century medicine talk. So as you can see, this is our surgery display. This is open during the day as well. However, 17th century or 18th century surgery was kind of a brutal endeavor. In the casemate right about here is where we would have had those ad hoc field hospitals set up during the siege. And there's a reason that it's placed here so close to the fireplace. Now, what I'd like you guys to understand is during this period of history, we're hucking lead musket balls at each other at approximately 1,000 feet per second. Okay, lead does not do what modern bullets do, where it goes in one end, out the other, maybe tumbles a little bit, but for lack of, further description, it leaves a $1 billion wound. The lead, when it hits your body, is going to deform, and it's going to turn into shrapnel. It is going to impact your bones, and your bones are going to shatter and turn into shrapnel. And when you're out here on the frontier, especially during the 18th century, we do not have the medical technology to go rooting around in your limb and find all of the shrapnel and ethyl methyl bad stuff that is putting your life at risk. It is much easier and much safer for you if we simply liberate the limb from your body. Amputation. Now, we do not have anesthetic. What we do have is an abundance of liquor. So the first thing they're going to do is they're going to hand you a bottle of rum, like my compatriot here, and they are going to feed you rum until you can't see straight. I want you to keep in mind, just until you can't see straight, not until you pass out. We need you to be awake for this entire instance, because if at any point you pass out and your pulse is so weak that we can't feel it physically, we're going to assume that you're dead and not waste our time with you. We're simply going to move on to the next victim and try saving another life. So we need you awake and somewhat responsive during this entire procedure. Now we're going to give you something to bite down on, but we're not going to give you leather here in Fort William Henry because we need leather. We're going to use cured leather to repair things. We're not going to give you a twig because it turns out that's kind of a myth. You don't give somebody a twig because it's going to shatter in their mouth and then you need to worry about them choking. But we got to give you something because the amount of pain that you're about to endure is such that you will grind your teeth to the point where your molars shatter against each other. So the thing that we have a whole lot of and can make more of without an issue is lead musket balls. Yes, lead is poisonous. No, they don't know this at this point in history. Remember, germ theory, not a thing yet. Okay, so we are going to give you a lead musket ball to bite down on. And as you can see, we have an artifact of just one of those musket balls that has teeth indentures in it from when a surgery was actually performed. Now, doctors at this time take pride in the fact that they can liberate a limb from a human body in under 90 seconds. That is important because I'm about to hack a limb off of you after force feeding you alcohol for the better part of 20 minutes. So, adults in the group who have experience with drinking, what happens to your blood when you have imbibed a substantial amount of your favorite beverage of choice? Say it again.
It's thin.
It thins. So your blood is thin, and I have just hacked off a limb. Speed is of the essence at this point in the surgery. He's going to take his scalpel, which, by the way, he has not sanitized, and he's probably used it on multiple people already because, in their opinion, blood is the cleanest liquid that you could possibly expose an implement to, so why clean it? So they're going to then cut all the fleshy bits north of the wound. Okay, all the tendons, the ligaments, the soft tissue, the muscle, they're just going to slice a big old ring around it as if they're trying to have an apple. Then what they're going to do is they're going to take their trusty bone saw, which looks a lot like a saw you would use to delimb a tree. Only now you're delimbing a person, hopefully not turning them into a trunk in the process. Now, they are going to cut about halfway to 3/4 of the way through the bone. They are going to take a mallet, and instead of cutting all the way through the bone, they are simply going to pop it off. It is as gruesome and painful as you're thinking. Now, before you lose any more blood, we are going to take a cast iron pan, which we have found in our trusty fireplace that we probably used to cook breakfast that morning. We're going to flip it over so the bottom side's facing the wound, and we are going to apply it to the wound, cauterizing it and hopefully staunching the bleeding. By the way, that's why nobody bleeds out in Star Wars. Lightsabers cauterize at the same time as they cut. Bet they would have loved to have had a laser sword back then, okay? So, the doctor's going to leave 2 flaps of skin because nothing heals better than your own skin. He's going to fold them over and he's going to sew that skin to the stump, for lack of a better term. Now, he's not going to use thread because then we'd have to go in and we'd have to remove the thread, and that leaves you open to even more bleeding and infection. What do you think we're going to end up using to sew this injury up? Very good. We're going to use cat gut. Now, here's the problem, okay? Well, this is the first time I've had a cat on the tour. I'm sorry. I'm on autopilot. Okay? On the bright side, cats are not indigenous to upstate New York, so we're going to run through them real quick, sparing the feline population. Eventually, we're going to end up running into using raccoon, fox, squirrel, skunk. How'd you like to have your limb sewn up with skunk gut?
Oh.
As if it doesn't smell bad enough already, right?
Oh.
So we're going to use that because applying a biologic to another biologic is the best way to make sure that the wound is going to heal up. That stuff's going to dissolve away. At least that's what they think. But modern medicine, we understand that putting a foreign bodily object into another bodily object is a great way for you to get what? Infected, right? But as far as we know, we've stopped the bleeding. You're still relatively cognitive, so we're going to go ahead and put you further down into the casemate on a nice little bed of straw, and we are going to tell you to convalesce and keep the wound clean. What do you think we're going to tell you to keep the wound clean with?
Rum.
Absolutely not. That's for drinking.
Swamp water.
Swamp water. So your chance of infection just went from 99% to 100. You are in a bad way. We have a record of an individual. Before I get into that, what kind of infection you think we're going to incur? Close. Anybody here ever hear of gangrene? Yeah, necrosis of the flesh. The skin and the flesh literally starts to die, and the only cure for that is, guess what? More amputation. We have a record of an individual who had to have his toe amputated, and that led to a further 9 infections of gangrene. The amputations were so severe that eventually it got all the way up to his pelvis, and there was nothing more they can do. Said individual died of a gunshot wound to the head, more than likely administered by the doctor. Because remember, at this point in history, suicide is still something that's frowned on. Heavily. Okay? So, that individual unfortunately expired after what could only be a long-term experience with agonizing pain and misery.
That's a good idea. Take a picture.
Alright guys, I'm gonna have you come over here and stare down a long scary hallway for a couple of minutes.
See any ghosts in there?
By the way, I do not chase AirPods, I don't chase cell phones, I don't chase jewelry, and I don't chase wallets. So if it goes down there, consider it a donation to the museum.
This fort, goodness gracious. This ramp in the fort leads down into the powder magazine, which is where the Army would have stored their gunpowder, their ammunition, anything they needed to fire any of the weapons here at Fort William Henry. They kept the gunpowder in particular underground for 3 really good reasons. Who wants to take a guess? When it explodes, you want to kind of dampen it. 2 more.
If it gets hit, you don't want to get hit by artillery.
You want to get hit by artillery. Yep, those 2 kind of go together.
It's harder to get to.
It's harder to get to.
Keep it dry.
Keep it dry. There's a huge fiery thing in the sky.
Sun.
Keep it out of the sun. Yeah, so you don't want it out in the open, because if someone decides to betray your army and go try to save their own skins by telling the French where you keep your gunpowder, they might target it with their mortar fire, and then that would blow up the fort, and that's not a good thing. You also want to keep it dry, keep it out of the rain, because if you have seen Pirates of the Caribbean, you know that gunpowder and water do not mix well. But you also want to keep it out of the sun so that it doesn't accidentally spark and blow up, and then you explode your own fort, which is arguably worse than the French blowing it up. So they kept their gunpowder underground. They also kept it underground so that they could keep track of who went down there and messed with it. There would have been a guard stationed here 24/7 to make sure that only people who were authorized to go into the powder magazine went into the powder magazine. This is the only way in or out. Now, the main spirit we see over here, there are 2, but the one the ghost guys encounter most often is the little girl that CJ was talking about. We think she's trying to play hide and seek with us. Mostly because sometimes when a guide comes over to lock up at the end of the night, we'll see a shadow dart around the corner. And we have to go investigate, because we are taught that if we see someone wandering around the fort, obviously it's a guest trying to steal our opossums. And so we have to go make sure they don't do that. And we'll go down and search for our guest who is trying to steal from the fort, and we find no one. And so we'll think, well, we're tired. And we'll come back up, turn to close the door, and see a head poke around the corner, and then dart back. and think, well, either it's the little girl or that guest is the second best person in the world at hide and seek. And so we go back down and we don't find anybody. It's a small room with a dirt floor. You can tell when people have been walking back there, and there's never anyone down there. And so we'll come back up and turn to close the door and see a head poke out and dart back and think, not this time. And so we close and lock the door and we leave for the night after clocking out late. And so the following morning, we get a very strongly worded email from our managers complaining about the fact that we clocked out late again. So we think she's playing hide and seek, but she might be trying to get us fired. Jury's out, we're not sure. We had a relatively new guide a couple of years ago who was working here because wandering around the fort after dark is kind of neat. He didn't believe in ghosts at all. He just wanted to be here for the history aspect after dark. He drew the short straw one night and had to walk around and close up by himself. And when he got to this door here, he saw a shadow dart around the corner. He went to check. He didn't find anybody. So he thought, I'm tired, I'm seeing things. And so he came back up and turned to close the door and saw a head poke around the corner and dart back. And he thought, I've seen that horror movie before. So he closed and locked the door, and he went to get another guide to check with him. When they came back over, they unlocked the door, flung it open, and saw a little girl standing against the far wall at the base of the ramp. She was in a light-colored dress, long braided pigtails, and she was smiling at them. As soon as she noticed them looking at her, she laughed a bit and waved, and then vanished. Now, these two didn't do one of the screaming numbers tearing out of here. No, they very calmly closed and locked the door and left for the night. And little less calmly, the guide who didn't believe in ghosts put in his 2 weeks notice the next day. Their turnover rate is remarkable some summers. So we see this little girl pretty often. Guests normally capture her in photos and videos. She's a little bit shyer when it comes to guests. The last picture we got of her actually was taken about a month and a half ago, and she was standing over in the corner of the parade grounds there. So keep taking pictures, and you're looking for anything weird when you're looking back at them. Before I send you down into the powder magazine, I do want to warn you about another ghost that we see here. Experience, rather, more than see. We believe he's a guard, mostly because he doesn't like it when people go down into the powder magazine. There would have been a guard stationed here 24/7, just like all the other provision storage areas here, because the provisions didn't belong to the fort or to the officers, but they belonged to the King of England. And King George did not want his stuff stolen, so he ordered that there would be guards stationed 24/7 in these areas. He likes to push people who try to go down into the magazine, so watch your step. He's better known, however, for pulling on women's hair, particularly blondes with ponytails. He has a bit of a type. He would have been between the ages of 16 and 22. And we think that he pulls on women's hair because he's a teenager in the middle of the wilderness with a bunch of other teenagers for a couple of years. Maybe he forgot some of the manners his mom taught him. He does occasionally say goodnight to people, though, if they say goodnight to him first. He particularly responds to military veterans. So try saying goodnight when you leave because you might get a reply. Now, I also want to warn you that parts of this ramp are original to the fort, built in 1755. Not the brick, but the larger cobblestone pieces. And if you're keeping track, that is pre-OSHA, so the flooring is kind of uneven, so watch your step. If you'd like to, you can head down and take a couple pictures, and we'll meet back here in a minute or two to keep going on the tour. I'm not going with you, have fun. That's a no.
Here you go. Hello? Do you see anything?
There's something behind there. Just in case.
It's okay. Good night. Good night, whoever you are. Good night. Good night. Good night.
Opened.
Now, in FB7 mode. Now, in fish mode. Alright, you guys ready?
Ready.
Alright, he's ready. You guys ready?
Ready.
There.
Alright.
So it's
Standing by.
It's gonna sound a little noisy. It's gonna sound echoey. We're gonna try to be listening for the words. Okay, hello to anyone who's down here with us. Brian and friends, we just want to talk to you. We want to make contact, and the password is airplane. If you could say the word airplane for us, we'd really appreciate that. Anybody here with us? Yeah. No? We get EVPs like this all the time. Is there anyone here with us? No. Well then who said that? Okay, who's here with us? What's your name? Can you say hello for us? Hi. Can you say the password for us, please?
So that's gonna be, so hopefully you guys get the idea on that audio recording I recorded last year from last year's recording. Now I'm not gonna upload the whole recording that I recorded from last year's ghost tour of Fort William Henry, but I'm only showing you this clip, showing you that clip I just showed you, just to give you guys the idea of what the spirits, the ghosts that lies in the fort are like. So, but hopefully you still enjoy this video, and don't forget to subscribe, like, and also hit the notification bell, and don't forget to check out Young Vintage Gamer if you're into video game reviews or video game content, and share both channels and share both videos with everyone you know. This is Donnie Horror Story 96 signing off.